Welcome back to Snail's Story, where every tale is told slowly, with real emotions and genuine love. How are you today? Is the weather sunny where you are, or a little gray like Maple Hollow in today's story? Have you ever seen a familiar object on a stranger and felt your heart pause, caught on something you couldn't explain? In today's story, a widowed father and a young waitress, two lives that seem completely unrelated, unexpectedly brought together by a teardrop-shaped pendant. But what they truly discover isn't just a lost blood tie kept secret for 26 years. It's a second chance to love again, to forgive, and to call somewhere home. If you love healing, tender stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, okay? And join Snail's story on this journey, one beat at a time. Slow and true. In early autumn, the small town of Maple Hollow always carried a scent unlike any other. The smell of baked apple pie mingled with damp earth, the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from hillside cabins, and the scent of old memories Evan Monroe sometimes thought he'd forgotten. But as it turned out, it only took a breeze carrying that familiar fragrance to make his heart ache like it all happened just yesterday. That morning, he drove his 10-year-old son, Caleb, to Marnie's diner as a weekend treat. Caleb loved the honey-buttered toast there, but Evan, he came for another reason. It wasn't the food, it wasn't the coffee either. It was the silence he found sitting at that worn-down corner table, listening to spoons tapping on plates and letting himself simply be. Marnie's was tiny, with red and white checkered wallpaper peeling at the edges, wooden chairs that wobbled on loose screws, and a wind chime that jingled each time the door opened. Evan pushed the door in, Caleb bouncing behind him, smiling and greeting the familiar owner before sliding into the window-side booth. "Morning, you too," called Marnie, her hands busy rinsing glasses as her eyes flicked toward the back counter. "Lucy, table 3, sweetheart." Evan wasn't paying much attention until the waitress turned around. She wore a pale green apron over a white button-up, sleeves dotted with faint ink smudges. Her hair was tied loosely, with strands falling across her cheeks. She walked briskly toward their table, notepad in hand, voice gentle and slightly shy. "Hello, sir. I'm Lucy. What can I get you and your son today?" Evan looked up to answer, but his gaze halted not because of her voice or even her face, although something about it felt vaguely familiar. It was the pendant, a small silver teardrop with a pressed lavender blossom sealed inside. In the sunlight pouring through the window, it shimmered softly. Evan couldn't breathe. He had seen that pendant before. Not once, but hundreds, thousands of times on the neck of his late wife, Lillian. He had given it to her in the summer of 1997, when they were still young, still believed love could overcome any mistake. That pendant was one of a kind, custom made, never sold anywhere. After Lillian died in a car accident, Evan had searched everywhere for it. He assumed it had shattered, been lost, or lay buried somewhere in the wet earth along the hillside road where the crash happened. And yet, here it was, resting quietly on the neck of a girl he had never seen before. "Dad." Caleb tugged at his sleeve. Evan blinked. "Are you okay?" The boy pointed to Lucy. "Her necklace, it looks exactly like the one in the picture of Mom you showed me last night." Lucy froze. She looked from Evan to Caleb, then instinctively touched the pendant around her neck. "Oh, this," she said softly. "I don't really know where it came from. My foster mom gave it to me when I was little. I've worn it since I was 8, her voice trailed off, sensing that something about this moment wasn't quite right. Evan didn't speak. His eyes remained fixed on that tiny object as if blinking would make it vanish. But it wasn't just the necklace. It was something deeper, a memory, an unfinished promise, a fragment of the past he'd once buried beneath the black soil of the farm, thinking it had long since decayed. "Sir, are you all right?" Lucy asked gently. Evan nodded, breath catching like he'd just climbed a steep hill. He could hear the spoons clinking against bowls, the coffee machine humming behind the counter, and the loud thudding of his own heartbeat. It had been so long since his heart last beat this hard. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He sat alone on the old wooden chair on the front porch, holding a cup of cold chamomile tea. The autumn breeze brushed softly through the rustling stalks of dried corn behind the farm. The scent of soil, rotting wood, and lavender drifting from the garden fence rose in waves like gentle reminders that something was still unresolved. The image of the pendant on Lucy's neck replayed in his mind like a slow-motion reel. That shimmering light, the dried lavender sealed in translucent resin, it couldn't be a coincidence. Evan opened the old wooden drawer inside the house and took out a small tin box. It used to hold cookies, now so worn that the lettering on the outside was barely legible. But inside, it was a treasure chest. Old photographs, a few handwritten notes from Lillian, and a bundle of faded love letters. He sifted through them, layer by layer, until he found the photo. It was a black and white picture with scalloped edges. Lillian standing in a lavender field, holding a small baby girl, maybe just a few months old. She was beaming with joy. The baby wore a light purple dress and a white knit hat. On the back of the photo, in slanted ink, was the note, "Lavender, our first child." Evan froze. He had never seen this photo before. Maybe he had, but buried it deep in his memory. He and Lillian met when they were 21. He was a tractor mechanic -4-hire. She worked at a bookstore in town. They fell in love quickly, passionately, and broke up just as quickly after a moment of infidelity's short lapse, but enough for Lillian to disappear from his life for nearly a year. When she came back, he knelt and begged for forgiveness, pleaded for a second chance. They got married not long after, but he had never asked where she'd gone during that missing year. Now, Yvonne began to understand, perhaps during that time. She had been pregnant, and that child was Lucy. He grabbed his phone and searched her name. Lucy Rose Carson. That middle name Rose was the same as the woman Marnie. The diner owner had once mentioned Lucy's foster mother, who had passed away a few years ago. His heart clenched. His wife had been pregnant, had given birth, and kept it hidden from him. Or maybe it was because of him that she felt she had no choice but to give up the child. He pressed the photo to his chest, silent. That old ache rose in him like a crashing wave of the pain of someone who just realized he might have lost the most precious thing in his life and never even knew. The next morning, Evan dropped Caleb off at school and returned to the farm. But his hands couldn't focus on milking the cows or harvesting greens like usual. Everything he touched felt clumsy, disconnected. He reopened the old tin box and found the final letter Lillian had written to him. Letter never sent. It discovered. Only after her passing, I always wanted to tell you I was sorry for not speaking the truth from the start. But some things, Evan, a woman can only carry in silence to keep moving forward. I hope that if one day you find out, you won't hate me. Evan set the letter down. His hands trembled. He had never hated Lillian, not once. If she hid something from him, it was because he had made her believe she couldn't share it. Part of him understood that, but the other part, he felt like a man who had abandoned his own child without ever knowing. He powered on his old laptop. The internet connection was weak and patchy, but it was enough to let him type into the search bar, Cedar Grove Orphanage Adoption Records. 2000. A few results came up. Evan read every word. His eyes stopped at one small entry. Lucy Rose, adopted by Rose Carson, single, occupation, elementary school teacher. No father listed. No birth mother contact. His vision blurred. Lillian had once given birth in silence, and the man who had vowed to protect her for life that was him had known nothing. Now that child, now a young woman, was living right here in town, serving honey toast at a small cafe, wearing around her neck a fragment of a past he thought was long lost. Evan closed the laptop. His heart beat wildly in his chest. He didn't know exactly what he was searching for. Redemption? A second chance. Or maybe just the chance to see a piece of Lillian again. But he knew now this was no longer. Just about a pendant. 2 days later. Evan drove to Cedar Grove, a town about an hour away from his farm, through winding red dirt roads. In the passenger seat sat an old photograph and a small tin box. He carried them like a charm, as if the past might lend him the strength to face the truth of the present. He stopped in front of a small, pale yellow building with dusty glass doors and a wooden sign that read, Cedar Grove Child Care Center, Old Records Office. A silver-haired lady with glasses, brewing tea, was the first to greet him. "What are you looking for, young man?" she asked in a slow, gentle voice. Evan gave a respectful nod. "I'd like to ask about a girl named Lucy Rose Carson. She was adopted sometime in the early 2000s. Her adoptive mother was Rose Carson. I know I don't have legal access to the records, but are you family?" The woman interrupted, looking him directly in the eye. Evan hesitated, then nodded. I have reason to believe I'm a biological relative." Silence. She set her teacup down and stared at him for a long moment, as if searching his eyes for truth. Then she gave a small nod. "According to Iowa state law, birth parent information can only be disclosed with the adoptee's consent. But if you truly are a relative, I may allow you to view a partial administrative copy, no personal names. Is that all right?" Evan nodded. He knew he was walking a thin line between legality and morality. But some things simply couldn't wait any longer. The old paper records were brought out. Yellowed pages, faint typewriter ink. Some sections corrected with white out. Evan read through carefully until he reached the key part. Birth name: Lavender R.L. Gender. Female date of birth: April 17, 1999. Social worker's note: child was surrendered by the mother in good health. The mother declined to provide information about the biological father. She left a short letter and a small teardrop-shaped pendant containing dried lavender. Oh no, she named the baby Lavender. Official records were reissued upon adoption by Ms. Rose Carson, changing the child's name to Lucy Rose Carson. Evan stopped at the name Lavender RLL. What else could the L stand for, if not Lillian? He remembered the first time Lillian had ever spoken about her favorite flower. They were still students then, lying on the grass behind the bookstore. She had said, "If I ever have a daughter, I'll name her Lavender. It's soft, gentle, but strong enough to grow even in the driest soil." Evan's throat tightened. That child was truly his, and Lillian's daughter. There was no more doubt. By the time Evan stepped out of the records office, the sun was already low. The light filtered through the bare tree branches, golden and quiet like a sigh. He stood still by his car, holding the photocopied document. A breeze flipped through the papers, revealing one final handwritten line by the social worker. A short letter was enclosed, unsigned. Evan opened the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. "If one day you find your birth parents, please forgive them. They didn't leave you because they didn't love you, but because they didn't know how to keep you. But I love you. I will always love you." Evan sank into the car seat. His heart felt like it was being crushed by an invisible weight. For all these years, he'd grieved the loss of Lillian, but never once imagined that he had also lost a daughter. And that little girl, now a young woman, was living right there in Maple Hollow, working at a small cafe where his son ordered honey toast every weekend. She had been that close, and he had never known. On the way home, Evan pulled over in the middle of a field. Dusk was settling in, and the sky held a strange lavender hue. He stepped out, opened the trunk. and took out the tin box that held Lillian's keepsakes. He opened the lid and pulled out the old photograph Lillian holding the baby girl. "Lucy," he whispered, her name fragile on his lips. He didn't know if he had the right to call her daughter. He didn't know if she was ready to know the truth. He didn't know if two hearts, two distant worlds could be stitched back together after 25 years of silence. But he knew one thing. If Caleb hadn't pointed to that pendant that day, if he hadn't walked into that cafe by chance, if the past hadn't found a way to come back, he might never have known that a life, a soul carrying half his blood, had been living under the same sky all along. 2 days after the trip to Cedar Grove, the weather in Maple Hollow began to turn cold. The first winter winds slipped through every crack in the windows, carrying the scent of withering grass and damp soil. Evan had started wearing a thick jacket every morning before heading out to the barn. But that morning, he hadn't even made it out the door when he heard Caleb shouting from the attic. "Dad, come up here, quick!" Evan rushed upstairs. Caleb was sitting in the middle of a pile of dusty old boxes Lillian had packed away years ago, most of which Evan had never dared to touch since her passing. The boy held out something in his hand, a yellowed photograph with scalloped edges, the kind developed from instant film back in the day. "I found this in one of Mom's old clothing boxes," Caleb said innocently. "How come I've never seen this picture before?" Evan took the photo and, for a moment, his heart stopped. It was old, but unmistakable. Lillian sat in a wooden rocking chair on the porch of their old home. In her arms was a newborn baby girl, dressed in a pale lavender dress, wearing a white knit cap. But what froze Evan in place was this: the baby wore a pendant identical to Lucy's. He turned the photo over. The handwriting on the back was slanted, written with a fountain pen in faded violet ink. Lavender is 3 months old. Autumn 1999. Lavender, the name Lucy's foster mother had given her. The same name tied to Lillian's favorite flower. The same name Lillian had once whispered on a rainy night. "If I ever have a daughter, I'll name her Lavender, a name that knows how to bloom." Evan sank onto the floor, gripping the photograph tightly. There was no more doubt. No more maybe, no more what if. Lillian had given birth to a daughter, had held her in her arms, had kept the pendant hand, had hidden the proof right here, in their home. He had lived among these pieces for over 20 years, never knowing how to put them together. Caleb sat down beside his father, tilting his head up. "Who is this little girl, Dad? Is she my sister?" Evan swallowed hard, voice hoarse. "Yes, maybe she is." "Then how come I've never met her?" Evan looked at his son. His wide eyes held no blame, only curiosity. And within them, Evan saw something he had taken years to find again: trust. He gently patted Caleb's head. "Because there are things I didn't know. But I'm trying to find them now, son." That afternoon, Evan opened Lillian's wooden keepsake box for the first time in years. Alongside the photo, he found a small, leather-bound notebook with worn edges. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, Lillian's journal. The first entry read, "April 19th, 1999. I gave birth yesterday, a baby girl. I named her Lavender because she's as gentle as the first lavender blooms of summer, but as strong as the cry she made when she entered the world." Evan flipped through the pages, line by line, like a man searching for light in a dark cave. Lillian had recorded her journey as a single mother for several months before deciding to give up the baby, 'cause she couldn't afford to raise her and because her heart hadn't healed from the wound he'd once left behind. One passage made him stop for a long time. He doesn't know. "I don't dare tell him. I'm afraid that if I do, he'll disappear again. I couldn't survive being abandoned a second time, not this time, not with our child." Tears fell onto the page. Evan wiped them quickly, but the ink had already smudged. He understood now. Lillian hadn't abandoned her child out of apathy. She had been afraid. Afraid she wasn't strong enough. afraid of being hurt again. Afraid to face the man she had once loved so deeply that she couldn't even forgive herself. And now, Lucy, the tiny baby once named Lavender, was living just a few streets away, a stranger in the same town. That night, Evan sat by the fireplace, holding the photograph. On the table beside him lay the open journal. The fire crackled softly, and the old grandfather clock ticked away the silence. Caleb was reading nearby, but kept glancing at his father now and then. "Are you going to find her?" the boy asked. Evan nodded. "I'll try, but first I need to know if she wants to be found." Caleb closed his book and came closer. "If it were me, I'd want to, 'cause everyone wants to know where they really come from." Evan looked at his son, then at the photograph. That sentence echoed in his mind like a quiet truth. Everyone wants to know where they come from, and now, he knew it was time to give Lucy the right to know. Evan parked his truck in front of Marnie's diner. On a blustery Friday afternoon, the sky was covered in pale gray clouds, not quite raining, but cold enough to make people cross their arms and hunch their shoulders as they stepped outside. He sat in his truck for nearly 15 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had rehearsed countless versions of what to say, how to begin. But now that he was actually here, about to step out and face the truth, he felt like a man with no right to speak. "I'm your biological father." Too abrupt. "I have something I think it's connected to you." Too vague, easy to dismiss. "I knew your mother, Lillian." Maybe that was the only place he could begin. Lucy was wiping down a table near the window when he walked in. Her brown hair fell softly to her shoulders, and she wore the same pale green apron as always. But today, there was a small purple flower barrette clipped into her hair, looking so much like Lillian in her younger days. Sometimes it's the smallest things that hit the hardest. "Hi, Mr. Monroe." She greeted him with a smile, recognizing him. "Back for Caleb's honey toast. I added a vanilla twist today." Evan gave a slight nod. He didn't know how to begin. The girl in front of him felt too vivid, too close, and every prepared word scattered like leaves in the wind. "Actually, I came alone today," he said quietly, his gaze flickering to the pendant around her neck. "I wanted to ask you something, Lucy, something personal. If you have a moment." Lucy paused slightly but nodded, leading him to a corner table away from the other customers, then sat across from him. There was a polite caution in her eyes, but she stayed calm and composed. Evan pulled a photograph from his coat pocket. The old picture of Lillian holding the newborn in a lavender dress. "Have you ever seen this photo before?" he asked, voice low enough to be carried away by the wind. Lucy took it in her hands. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then her eyes widened, lips parted in disbelief. She looked closer. "This is the picture my foster mother used to keep. It went missing during a move when I was 14. I thought I'd imagined it. No one believed me when I said it existed." She looked up at him, confusion spreading across her face. "How do you have this?" Evan took a deep breath. His hands clenched beneath the table, trying to stop from shaking. "Because the woman in that photo was my wife, Lillian." Lucy froze. What did you just say?" "Lillian and I were married. She died in a car accident when Caleb was just a baby." And his voice caught, "And only recently did I find out she had a daughter. Before we were married, she never told me." Lucy stared at him, her eyes locked on his face, trying to sort truth from fiction. "You mean Evan nodded. "You are Lillian's daughter, and possibly mine." Silence. The kind of silence so deep the soft jingle of the wind chimed by the diner door sounded like it belonged in another world. Lucy clutched the photo in her hands, then shook her head slightly. "This sounds like a movie. How am I supposed to believe this? You show up after 20-something years and say this. I don't even know who you are. I understand. And you have every right to doubt it. I don't expect you to believe me right away. But I have proof: Leon's journal, the Cedar Grove adoption files, and he paused an apology. Lucy didn't look at him. She held the photo tightly. But her eyes drifted toward the window, where autumn leaves were scattered across the damp street. I used to dream about meeting my birth mother, she said softly. I imagined she was gentle, warm, just like my foster mom described. But I never thought she left me. I thought maybe she was poor, sick, couldn't take care of me. I never imagined she had another life, a husband, a son, everything except me. Her voice wasn't angry, only weary, as if she had spent years making peace with being the one left behind. And now someone had come back and said, it's not the whole story, unraveling everything inside her, all over again. Evan bowed his head. I have no excuse, only truth and remorse. I didn't know Lillian had a child. If I had, things might have been different. But I'm not here to ask you to accept me as your father. I came to tell you this: you were never forgotten, at least not by your mother. And now, if you'll allow me, I'd like to try to make amends, even if that just means standing quietly on the sidelines of your life. Lucy said nothing. After a while, she gently placed the photograph back on the table. Her eyes were red. But no tears fell. I need time, she said, still not meeting his gaze. Time to process this, to figure out who I am. Evan nodded. I'll wait, as long as it takes. He left the diner with heavy steps, but something inside felt just a little lighter. He wasn't hoping for instant forgiveness just for Lucy. To know the truth and to have the right to choose. Not to grow up with a story missing half its pieces. And as he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw Lucy still sitting at the table, her hand resting gently on the pendant at her chest. A small gesture, but to Evan, it was hope. Sunday morning, Maple Hollow lay beneath a thin veil of mist. Evan's farm woke up as it always did, the sound of roosters crowing behind the barn, the scent of damp grass carried by the fog that clung to the wooden window frames. But something felt different today. His mind wasn't on feeding the cows or checking the water pump like usual. He was waiting, not expecting, but preparing. A clean tablecloth was laid on the old wooden table on the porch. A pot of lavender tea sat in the center, gently steaming. A plate of butter cookies Caleb had begged to make the night before, and a photograph of Lillian holding a baby girl framed in simple wood, tilted toward the morning light. 9:14 a.m. The sound of a bicycle echoed from the dirt road. Evan stood up, heart pounding. A silver-gray bike slowly emerged from behind the willow trees. Riding it was Lucy. She wore a cream-colored sweater, a thick scarf wrapped around her neck, her hair tied back neatly. She stopped in front of the wooden gate, not stepping in right away. Her hands remained on the handlebars, eyes questioning herself, was I right to come here? Evan didn't move forward. He simply nodded and opened the gate. A simple gesture. No words. Lucy walked her bike inside. Her gaze wandered across the distant lavender fields, the oakwood swing in the garden's corner, the old white-painted house. I used to imagine what the farm looked like, she said quietly, just loud, enough not to be lost in the breeze. But I didn't expect it to look exactly like the pictures I used to draw as a kid. Evan invited her to sit at the porch table. He didn't ask why she came, didn't ask what she wanted. He just poured tea, gently enough that it made no sound. Lucy lifted the teacup. The soft aroma of lavender rose up, carrying her into faint memories, dreams of a smiling woman in sunlight. Holding her close, so close it felt real. This smell, it's hers, isn't it? She asked. Evan nodded. She loved lavender so much that every year she planted a section of the garden just for it. She once said, "This flower is resilient, softly fragrant, never needing praise, but unforgettable all the same. Lucy pressed her lips together. A long silence passed. Finally, she reached out and lightly touched the photo frame. "This photo, it's real. It's memory. It's proof," she said softly. "I spent my whole childhood with one question in my mind. Who was my birth mother? Why did she leave? Did she love me? But I never thought I'd get an answer." Evan's hands tightened slightly. "I'm sorry for letting you grow up with those questions." "I don't blame you," she said, looking up. "I just don't know what to do with the answers." Caleb came running out from the house, his eyes lighting up when he saw Lucy. "Lucy," he exclaimed, holding a colored pencil and a sketchbook. "You really came. I drew more lavender fields for you." Lucy let out a quiet laugh, surprised by how easily a child could close the distance between them. Evan started to speak, afraid Caleb was being too much, but Lucy had already sat down beside the boy, examining his messy lines with sincere attention. "Can I draw too?" she asked, borrowing the purple pencil from Caleb's hand. And for the first time in years, she drew her childhood dream again: a wooden house, a field of lavender, and two figures standing on a hill, a man holding a straw hat and a woman cradling a child. Evan stood silently, watching. He knew this wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. That afternoon, Lucy walked around the farm with Evan. She listened as he spoke about how Lillian used to make her own plum jam, how she gave names to every chicken in the coop, how she sat reading under the old maple tree. "Every evening, she's still here, in every corner," Evan said. "Even now." Lucy nodded quietly. "Then maybe I'll stay for a while," she said. "Just for a bit, to learn who my mother really was." Evan didn't answer immediately. He knew any words at that moment would feel too much. Instead, he lowered his gaze and pulled out a soft, leather-bound notebook, Leon's journal. "I think this is the only thing your mother left behind, and you have every right to keep it." Lucy took it. She didn't open it, just held it to her chest like she was holding a part of her heart she'd finally found again. Before leaving, Lucy stopped at the lavender fence line. She bent down, gently plucked a purple sprig, brushed it to her lips, then tucked it behind her ear. "I don't know what to call you," she said, still looking far away. Evan tightened his grip on the straw hat in his hands. "Call me whatever you like. Just know I'm here. No expectations, no demands, but always here." Lucy smiled for the first time since they met again. "Then today, I'll just call you Evan. But maybe, someday, I'll call you something else." Then she turned, slowly pedaling away from the farm, leaving behind the soft scent of lavender and a man standing in the warm afternoon sun. His heart filled with a quiet warmth, like hearing his daughter call his name, even if only in silence. *3. Days after their first meeting at the farm, Lucy returned. She didn't call ahead. She didn't bring much, just a small notebook and a thermos of coffee. She stood on the porch, knocking so lightly that Evan thought he'd imagined it was the wind. But then he opened the door. There she was, still in her cream sweater, this time with a green scarf around her neck. "I brought coffee," she said awkwardly. "You made tea the other day? I figured it was my turn." Evan smiled and stepped aside to let her in. The kitchen was simple: a wooden table, a wood-burning stove, and blackened spots on the frying pan from Caleb's first cooking attempts. All of it made the space feel less formal, less daunting. Lucy sat down, poured coffee for both of them, then pulled a worn, leather-bound journal from her bag. "Lillian's diary. I've read most of it," she said. "Some parts are faded, but I understood more than I expected." Evan nodded. He knew the time had come to tell the rest. "You deserve to know," he began, "and I don't want any part of the story to be hidden, especially the worst part. The part that's mine." Back then, Evan was 21, an apprentice mechanic working on tractors in a nearby town. He met Lillian one rainy afternoon when her bike chain snapped on the road. She wore a green raincoat, beaming as she thanked him for fixing it tanned a few days. Later, she smiled just as brightly when she agreed to their first date. "We were poor, but foolishly hopeful," Evan said with a bittersweet smile. "We thought love was enough to get us through anything in certain futures. Bad choices, all of it." Lucy listened silently. "I betrayed her," Evan admitted, his eyes fixed on his hands. "Only once, but once was enough." Lucy didn't look surprised. The journal said she left in silence. Didn't leave a note. "I used to think she was angry or weak. But maybe she was stronger than I gave her credit for." Evan nodded, his gaze clouding over like an old wound touched by winter air. "Lillian disappeared for almost a year. I looked for her, but not hard enough. Part of me was ashamed. Part of me thought she'd never forgive me." He paused, then continued. "When she came back, she was still Lillian, gentler, quieter, less quick to laugh, but she gave me a second chance. She never spoke of that missing year, never asked, never blamed, and I didn't have the courage to ask either." "You didn't know she had given birth to me?" Evan shook his head. "No, I swear I didn't." Lucy set her cup down. Her voice held no anger, only sorrow. "So she kept me a secret." "And you let that secret sleep for decades." "Yes," Evan said. "The fault was both of ours, mostly mine for making her feel she couldn't trust me again." A while later, Caleb burst into the kitchen, proudly showing off a paper frog he'd folded in the backyard. Lucy laughed and bent down to pat his head, accepting the tiny origami frog with a grin. "I'm naming it Lavender," Caleb said. "Because it's purple, like your scarf." Evan froze. Lucy, after a moment's surprise, nodded gently. "I think that's a beautiful name," she said with a soft smile. When Caleb ran off to play again, Evan led Lucy to a small room at the end of the hallway. Inside was Lillian's old room, untouched since she passed away. Bookshelves, embroidered handkerchiefs, a wooden rocking chair by the window. "I could never bring myself to change it," Evan said, voice quiet as still water. "It felt like, if I kept it long enough, she might return. And now, maybe she has in you." Lucy stepped inside, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden desk where a small photo of young Lillian sat, hair softly curled, eyes deep and still like an autumn. "Lake, I look more like her than I thought," she whispered. "Not just the face, but the quiet inside." Evan stood behind her, silent, as Lucy prepared to leave. A fine mist began to fall. She pulled on her coat, adjusted her scarf, then turned to face Evan, who stood on the porch like an old oak tree, weathered by life, but still standing. "I still can't call you Dad," she said, direct and steady. "But today, I understand why, and I don't want to keep running anymore." Evan nodded. "That's more than I could hope for." Lucy turned to leave. But before she wheeled her bike away, she stopped and looked back. "I'll be back. Not because I need more answers, but because I don't want to keep going alone." Evan didn't reply. But inside him, a quiet thank you rose, like the sigh of dry earth finally touched by rain after a long, silent drought. That evening, Evan made stew, the only dish he could cook without burning. Lillian had once taught him how to slow cook it with shallots and carrots, adding a pinch of nutmeg so the aroma lingered like a secret, only revealed to those patient enough to wait. He hadn't planned to make a large portion, but somehow his hands reached for an extra handful of vegetables, set out a third bowl, and poured a glass of orange juice for someone who didn't drink wine. Caleb ran circles around the kitchen, helping his dad set the table, chirping, "Dad, is someone coming to dinner today? You're acting weird. You haven't shaved?" Evan chuckled, tapping his son's forehead. "Careful, or you're getting only carrots for dinner." "I like carrots," Caleb grinned, "especially when we eat with someone else." Lucy arrived at exactly 6:30, She wore a simple white blouse under a thin gray cardigan. Her hair was half-tied, with loose strands falling over her forehead. Around her neck was the familiar teardrop pendant with dried lavender, the one that had once stopped Evan's heart the moment he saw it. Now, it made his heart feel oddly calm. "I brought dessert," she said, lifting a paper box. "Baked apple pie, not sure it's as good as my mother's, but I tried using an old recipe." Evan took it, his hand trembling slightly. "You know, Lillian's recipe?" "No," Lucy replied. "But I once dreamed of a smell just like it. I tried a few times yesterday until I got the closest version." Dinner began in silence, not out of awkwardness. But because the three of them were still learning to grow used to each other's presence, Caleb was the first to break it. "Lucy, what do you do besides working at the diner?" Lucy smiled. "Studied education. I taught for a year in Cedar Grove, but I'm on a break now. I'm thinking about moving here to teach." "Then, can you help me with math? When Dad teaches me, I get it all wrong." Evan gave him a mock glare. "That's because you use the calculator before I can show you how to do it by hand." Lucy chuckled softly for the first time. Her laughter didn't feel out of place in this house. After dinner, Caleb brought out his drawing to show Lucy. A picture of a lavender field with 3 figures, in the center a man wearing a straw hat, a girl with long hair holding an apple pie, and a laughing boy. "I drew a family," Caleb said. "Not my real family, just the one I wish I had." Evan turned his face away. Lucy, meanwhile, pressed her lips together, her hand resting gently on the drawing as if trying to hold on to the warmth it offered. It had started to drizzle when Lucy was getting ready to leave. Evan walked her to the gate, umbrella in hand. "Do you want me to drive you home?" he asked, for the first time referring to himself as Dad, even if hesitantly. Lucy shook her head. "It's all right. I'm used to walking. This kind of rain helps me sleep." She paused, then looked at him long and steady. "I know I'm still keeping some distance," she said. "But tonight I realized something." Evan tilted his head. "I think you don't have to call just one person Dad to know where your home is." With that, she turned and walked away. Evan stood there, umbrella still closed in his hand. The rain tapped lightly against his coat, but he didn't feel cold. Because her words, soft and steady, felt like a hand pressed gently to his chest, right where his heart had been hardened for years. And now, it began to beat again, slow and sure, like the first bell toll from a house that's finally starting to become a home. Asterisk. Spring arrived in Maple Hollow without the brilliance of the South, but with a gentleness that was hard to put into words. The wind carried the scent of warming soil. Birds returned to sing on the porch railings and on the sunlit hillsides. Fresh grass began to peek through the melting snow. Evan stood in the patch of overgrown land behind the house, place that used to be Lillian's lavender field. After she passed, he'd left it untouched. Weeds grew wild. The old planting rows were nothing more than faint shadows beneath a layer of rotting leaves. "Here?" Lucy asked, standing beside him, wearing gray gardening gloves. Evan nodded. She tended to it like a child. Every morning she'd water it, trim it, talk to it. She believed flowers could hear you. Lucy crouched down and dug with a small trowel. The earth was damp, soft, and smelled like something ancient and honest. She smiled. "Maybe that's why I've always liked planting things. Whenever I'm sad, I dig my hands into the soil. It feels like touching something more real than anything else." The two began clearing weeds, pulling old roots, leveling the ground. Evan worked with a heavy hoe. Lucy used her bare hands. She didn't mind the dirt. She didn't complain. They didn't need to talk much. Everything between them moved in quiet understanding, like entering something sacred that existed long before they did. Caleb came out to help too, bringing water and planting a wildflower along the edge. I call it a helper flower, he said proudly. Evan chuckled. But Lucy nodded solemnly. A lavender field without a helper flower would be a little lonely. As the sun began to dip, they sat beneath the old maple tree by the fence, sleeves rolled up, dirt clinging to their fingernails. Evan opened a bottle of lemonade and poured it into 3 plastic cups. "This field," he said. Gazing out, "I never thought I'd plant it again. But now I think maybe I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Lucy asked. "Afraid that if I planted it, I might lose it again." She was quiet for a moment, then placed her hand on the earth and breathed gently. "But if you don't plant it again, you'll never know if it could bloom once more." Evan looked at her. Her hair was messy, forehead dotted with sweat, but her eyes were steady, strikingly like Lillian's on the days when she made decisions not for others, but for herself. A week later, they sowed the first lavender seeds together. Lucy had brought the seeds from an old shop in Cedar Grove, the exact variety Lillian used to plant: soft purple blooms, low stems, and a scent that clung like sunlight on linen. She placed each seed into the soil like placing a wish. Not rushed, not expecting, just quietly believing that if sown with honesty, something would grow, even if it was only hope. Evan placed a hand on her shoulder as they planted the final row. "Thank you," he said. Lucy looked up, her voice soft. "For what?" "For coming back. For helping me believe that some things, even after being lost, can begin again." That weekend, they built a small wooden sign in front of the field. Caleb wrote the letters himself, crooked but determined: "Lillian's Peace." Lucy stood in silence for a long time, staring at the sign. "I used to think I was the one who'd been abandoned," she said. "But maybe my mother was too, by fear, by the past, by the silence she forced herself to keep." Evan's voice was low. "We're all walking with wounds, but now we've found each other." Lucy nodded. That afternoon, the lavender field was still empty. No flowers yet, but the soil had been softened, the seeds had been planted, and the hands that were once strangers had now come together to nurture something shared. Caleb ran between the rows, arms stretched like wings. Lucy watched him, watched her little brother, or perhaps the little brother she never knew she had. Evan sat on a wooden bench at the edge of the field. Watching the two of them, one big, one small, Lan smiled. Not the smile of a man forgiven, but the smile of a man who is finally learning how to forgive himself. In June, lavender bloomed across the entire field behind the house. Not loud, not dazzling, just a soft purple hue, stretching out like morning mist, gently fragrant like memory. From a distance, the land looked as if it had been covered with a blanket woven from sunlight and flowers. Lucy stood at the edge of the field, holding a freshly cut bouquet of lavender. Her dress swayed in the breeze, hair loose, and the teardrop pendant still rested quietly on her chest, like it had never left the one who once loved her most, who once hid her so deep, even he couldn't admit it to himself. She looked toward the small cemetery behind the maple trees. There, a modest grave bore the simple inscription: Lillian Monroe, 1978-2016A. Woman who loved through silence. Evan didn't go with her. He stood from afar, letting Lucy have this moment with her mother, her first and her last. Lucy knelt at the grave. Placing the bouquet on the now grass-covered soil, she laid her hand on the cool stone. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. "Anymore? I'm here, Mom," she said softly, using that word, Mom. For the first time without a lump in her throat. "I was angry. I doubt it, but today I didn't come to blame you. I came to say thank you." A breeze passed through, carrying the lavender scent far into the afternoon, for giving birth to me, for loving me in the only way you knew how, and for leaving me, something greater than anything else, the chance to know that I was never forgotten. She bowed her head. Her hand gently gripped the pendant. "I've met Dad. the man you once loved. The man who once failed, but he stayed. And he waited until I was ready to forgive. She stood up, brushing off her knees. Sunlight filtered through the trees, touching her face like a silent gesture from someone no longer there. That evening, they held a small memorial by the lavender field. Evan laid out a long wooden table, covered in a white cloth with Lillian's favorite stew, homemade plum jam by Lucy, and a pie Caleb had helped shape into lopsided heart patterns. Friends from the town came, not many questions, just presents. They sat, listening to the wind, moving through the purple flowers, listening to the unspoken memories echoing in Lucy's smile and in Evan's quiet steadiness. Toward the end, Caleb stood up and read a short poem he'd written, Theirs. A purple field where Mom once planted longing. There's a sister, once a stranger, now a familiar whisper. There's a father, standing silent like a maple tree behind the porch. And there's Mitha, small child, who holds both their hands without asking why. No one said anything. Everyone smiled because everything that needed to be said had already been spoken by simply being there. Late that night, when the guests had left, Lucy stood with Evan beneath the porch. They looked out over the purple field, where the kitchen lights cast a soft golden path. Lucy gently touched his shoulder, wordless call. Dad. She said just one word. Evan turned to her, blinking softly. He didn't hug her. He didn't cry. He simply bowed his head low and reverent like a farmer bowing to the earth after sowing a season's worth of hope. Thank you, he replied, his voice steady like soil, warm like glowing coals. That night, in their small farmhouse, 3 people, a father, a daughter, and a boy, sat together, sharing stories of Lillian through tiny fragments, a weak cup of tea, an old phrase, a pie once burnt by mistake. No need for bloodlines. No need for long promises, just a table wide enough, a field full enough, and 3 people brave enough to step out of the years they had lost and find one another again. Through love unspoken, thank you for walking with Snail's story to the very marquee. Snail's story to the very end of a lavender field, a place where the past is wrapped in gentle fragrance, where wounds are healed not with apologies, but through the quiet presence of those who choose to stay. The story of Evan, Lucy, and Caleb reminds us, sometimes, forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken aloud. And family isn't always the ones who gave us life. It's the ones who stay, who tend gently, listen quietly, and walk beside us through the rest. If this story stirred something in you, a soft ache, a tear, or even just a small smile, leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next stories. Every week, Snail Story brings you slow, deep, and beautifully ordinary slices of life. See you in the next journey.